Hello, and welcome once again to CLS Live, a live stream series presented by the publishers of Contact Lens Spectrum. I'm Jason Jedlicka, and as typically the case, I am your host for today's episode. Each program, I have the chance to chat with leaders in the world of contact lenses, finding out what's going on in the contact lens industry from their perspective and with their insights. We talk about new and future products, the latest research, worldwide trends in prescribing, and even bring you updates from the floor of contact lens conferences. Well, today's episode, we're going to continue our journey through the past, present, and future of contact lenses by talking about the history of soft contact lenses. And this was someone that has seen this history firsthand and been known to have a few opinions about things from time to time. Joining me for today's show, all the way from Australia, is Professor Nathan Ephron. Dr. Ephron is an emeritus professor in the School of Optometry and Vision Science at the Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Australia, and the editor of the Journal of Clinical and Experimental Optometry. He lectures extensively worldwide, particularly in the field of ocular response to contact lens wear, and has authored over 1,100 articles, has written and edited 7 books that have been published, a total of 22 editions and foreign translations. Professor Ephron has won numerous international awards, including being made a Companion of the Order of Australia, which is Australia's highest civilian honor for contributions to optometry and vision science. Dr. Ephron, thank you so much for being here today, this afternoon where I'm at, this morning where you are. Did you manage a coffee or tea yet today?
No, I haven't yet. I'm still waking up, but looking forward to our chat.
Wonderful. Well, I have to say, this is quite an honor for me. We have a term here in the U.S. that we like to use called the GOAT, which is all capitals, which stands for the greatest of all time. And we love to make lists of who might be in the running for that title in all sorts of different areas, particularly like with sports and whatnot. But I think when it comes to contact lenses, you kind of have to be in the running for that. So it's definitely humbling for me to get to speak to you today. Quite a privilege.
That's nice of you to say that, Jason.
You're welcome. Well, so continuing on with our series on contact lenses yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Last episode, we talked about the history of GP lenses. And this week, again, we're going to talk about the history of soft lenses. But before we get there, as I noted, you have something that you're well known for among those of us who follow through history of contact lenses. And that is a quote you came up with some years ago about the death of GP lenses, or an article that you wrote about that. And for some reason, that just seems to follow you everywhere now. What year was that approximately? Can you refresh my memory?
Yes, I think around about 1990, I sort of, I've made it at various times. In 1990, I predicted by, or actually later, maybe 2010, I predicted by sort of 2010, we won't be having many rigid lenses left being prescribed anymore.
Correct. And so how did that quote become so famous? It was published, I'm guessing, or that you published this in an article, and it was just people love to take and run with that, especially those GP lovers.
Yes, I used to mention it at conferences and at various points, but I actually published a paper. I've forgotten what year this was now, but it was called Obituary, Rigid Contact Lenses. That was published in Contact Lenses and Anterior Eye, and that really was a fairly extensive review paper pointing out why it is that rigid lenses, shall we say, are being prescribed less now than they have been in the past. You know, my thinking on this really evolved from our observation of prescribing trends that I've been working on with Philip Morgan in Manchester for 25 years now, plotting the extent of prescribing of all different types of lenses in many countries around the world. And it became pretty clear at the beginning of our survey from the start that rigid lens prescribing was starting to drop very considerably. You know, in the UK, we started doing our surveys and it was dropping down from about maybe even 20% of all lenses when I started down to about, 4% recently. So the amount of prescribing has dropped considerably. But, I think I've been misquoted to some extent in respect to that famous quote, as you say, that I've always said that there will always be a need for rigid lenses for specialist fits. For if you've got a distorted cornea or keratoconus or post-surgery, where you've got a distorted cornea, you'll always need rigid lenses. That will always be the case. But many practitioners back in the 70s and 80s would prefer rigid lenses to soft lenses. And I didn't quite understand that because, soft lenses are more comfortable generally. If you're a general patient, I thought, well, rigid lenses are not going to survive. And they basically haven't. They have survived, though, as a specialty product.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the reality is that when I think about the last time I prescribed a corneal GP lens for standard refractive error, it's been a while. And, multifocals, sure, there merits to some GP multifocals. The translation is certainly something that's hard to get with a soft. And again, sclerals, ortho K have opened up new avenues for GP materials to grow in utilization. But I agree, the refractive error patient, I think that it's just soft lenses have come so much farther, even soft torics in particular. I remember starting out in my residency 25 years ago, and I think we were pretty happy to get someone in 2025 with a soft toric, and now I expect to get them 2015. So
that's right.
I think between that and the potential of soft lenses with aberration correction, which we can talk about before we're done here, I do think that soft lenses continue to work their way in. So let me back up just a little bit then. And for those of us, I mean, I'm still learning. I need to know more about you. We were talking before we came on about where you've lived most of your life, but tell me how you got into this field, and particularly contact lenses, how your education and your experience and the people you knew along the way got you to this path.
Sure. Yeah. Well, basically, right from the beginning, I took an academic route. When I finished my optometry training, I really was enjoying practicing optometry at the time, but I really had my heart set on an academic career. During the course, I was very motivated and thought, well, I'd really like to contribute in that way. So basically, when it came to starting off doing my PhD, I had to pick a topic to work on. And I almost started working on colour vision because the head of school at Melbourne, his name was Barry Cole, very important, influential academic optometrist in Australia, tried to convince me to work with him in the field of colour vision. I almost accepted that. But I was also interested in contact lenses. They were just emerging at the time. When I was in final year optometry in the mid-1970s, contact lenses were just being introduced onto the market. And that just was so exciting to try and understand what was happening there. And basically that won the day. And fortunately, I was at the University of Melbourne, and one of the academics there was Professor Leo Carney, who many Americans will know. He was involved in contact lens research. He did a bit of work with Richard Hill at Ohio State University. And Leo was setting up his lab in Melbourne, and I thought, well, look, here's an opportunity. I spoke to Leo, and he agreed, yes, let's do some work on contact lenses. So that's how it began, basically, to just my interest in contact lenses, seeing it emerge onto the market, and the excitement of starting to do some original research with one of the known figures in the field, Leo Carney. And that's what got me going.
Yeah, great opportunities. And I think it's interesting that you did enjoy the practicing of contact lenses, even as you were looking at the research side. I think that's critical. I think the best research is done when people also get the clinical side as well. It really helps. So let's go back to those days. And when you think about those first few years when soft lenses, I'm talking specifically soft lenses now, were new and initially being prescribed, what are some things that you might think of and go back and you think of and say, how did we ever survive those days? How did we get here? How did we not end up having them all banned or something like that? What were some of the things you saw back then that kind of make you scratch your head now as you think about them?
Yeah, well, there are, I suppose, a lot of things that I could look back to. But, of course, one of the biggest problems we were dealing with in the 1980s was deposits on lenses. Because, of course, in the early lenses, people would use the same pair of soft lenses for literally 3, 4, or 5 years. Right? Today, we often use them for one day, and that's it. They've gone. So a lot of our chair time was taken up solving problems relating to deposits. Working out, is that a protein film? Is that a calcium film? Are these jelly bumps? Is that an iron deposit? You know, and there's a whole science behind deposits, and that used to trouble me, trying to work out what these deposits were, working out strategies to get rid of those. People didn't want to throw their lenses out. You know, the lenses cost $200 each in those days. You know, they were hugely expensive. So people wanted to keep them. And we had these, you know, rigorous cleaning solutions, ultra strong cleaning solutions, protein removal systems. I don't know. Do they still sell protein removal systems?
I think you can find them if you look hard enough, but they're pretty hard to come by. Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, these were the things we were dealing with. And another thing, just one other example then that really used to trouble me was when toric lenses became available. Trying to fit toric lenses, you needed a PhD in trigonometry to try and work out how to work out where the axis is going to be and what the rotation is going to be and where to put the truncation. You know, Jason, I don't know if you know this, we used to do truncations. We used to cut the bottom off a toric lens so it would try to rest on the lower lid and locate that way. It's crazy stuff. Because, of course, if the truncation is resting on the lid margin, it's irritating it.
So why was that necessary? Was it because there was such a simplistic ballasting method for the lenses back then? Was it just prism, and so the lower lid would move it around, or why were they so complicated to get stable?
Well, the lenses were thicker in those days, so if you truncated the bottom off, there was a really thick sort of ledge, if you like, that would literally physically locate on that lower lid. And so it's a physical location, but it was uncomfortable. Well, people put up with it because they wanted their astigmatism corrected.
Right. The alternative was a corneal GP, and so
that's it. That's it.
So it makes sense in some ways. So
well, in those days, that's right. In those days, then when that was the choice, it was understandable that practitioners would fit GP lenses. Right. But of course, once proper modern toric lenses came along with, you know, magnificent stabilization characteristics and so on, you didn't need those sort of rigid lenses anymore.
Yeah, I think that is a big part of it, is getting those lenses to be stable, finding new and innovative ways to resist the torquing and things like that with the lid, with the blink. So yeah, the deposit thing, that's curious because I can see it now, but and haven't been around since that time, but I did complete my degree in the 90s, and we were still fitting some yearly lenses and some certainly quarterly lenses, and deposits were a thing, but never like that, not trying to keep a lens for that many years. So were most of the complications lid related or vision related or corneal related, or where did these deposits create the issues for most patients?
Deposits created issues mainly in terms of discomfort, but also vision. In fact, I published an important paper back in the 90s or the late 80s. It was actually it was the last time it was possible to do such an experiment, where we basically got a whole lot of patients who'd been wearing lenses for different periods of time. Some had been wearing their lenses for 2 weeks, some for 2 months, some for 2 years, some for 6 years. So we had a spread of number of years people had been wearing lenses, and we looked at the extent of deposits and the amount of vision loss. And we created a plot, and we could see that the older a lens became, then the more deposited it was, and the greater was the vision loss. We're only talking about a very small amount of vision loss, but it was a clear demonstration that the older the lens, the more vision loss you have. And that became then part of the argument for developing daily disposable lenses, which I guess we'll talk about in a moment. But that was an important study, because that is really one of the only studies that gives us the basis for saying this is why we regularly replace lenses.
Yeah, that makes sense, because you definitely notice it. And what's curious is, you know, you can take a patient, put them in 2 different soft lenses, and they may choose one as a preferred lens in terms of comfort over the other. But if you take that same lens they prefer and give them a 1-month-old version of it, they'll often pick the one that was less comfortable to begin with, but it's clean. And so you notice that a clean lens, it can be more comfortable, even if it's just because of the nature of the fact that it's clean, even if it's not a perfect fit or material for them. So
sure. Yep.
So going back through that, and we touched on it, and that is disposability, you know, going from yearly to quarterly, monthly, 2-week, and now to daily. Other than disposability, what other game changers have happened over the last 40, 50 years with soft lenses, you know, regarding material solutions, anything like that? What other moments do you look back and go, that was a big moment when this came out, that changed how everybody started wanting to make lenses?
Yes, well, the two biggest probably innovations in soft lenses, the three innovations in soft lenses were their invention in the first place by Whitley in the early 1960s. Then basically first came the next big innovation was daily disposable lenses, which came along in the mid 1990s, and that was mainly due to manufacturing innovations. To be able to do cast molding very effectively and on a mass scale. And then the next big innovation in terms of material science here were silicon hydrogel materials. That was really a game changer, because one thing we haven't spoken about actually in terms of problems in the early days of soft lenses was hypoxia, lack of oxygen. And all of the research in the early days, all of my early research was all about lack of oxygen, hypoxia, and the hypoxic changes that occurred in the cornea. Sort of your stromal striae, endothelial polymegathism, epithelial microcysts, in all layers of the cornea, you had hypoxic-induced changes that were rather troublesome. And we eradicated that with a snap of a finger with the introduction of silicon hydrogels, which are, of course, hugely oxygen permeable.
So let me ask you a question, because this is something that we talk about. I'm being in academia myself, and I'm teaching students all the time, and we'll still see patients who come in who are in silicone hydrogel lenses who've got some peripheral corneal vascular changes. You could call it neovascularization, you could call it some limbal engorgement, whatever you want to call it. Do you think that in today's world with the silicone hydrogel materials that we have, that hypoxia is essentially eradicated, and that these changes are related to maybe fit issues or solution issues or other issues other than oxygen permeability of the lens?
Yeah, well, I would have to say that we've basically solved hypoxia, I suppose, with the exception of fairly high minus lenses. So if you've got a patient wearing a -6 diopter lens, then then there could be perhaps coupled with the physical pressure of the lens, there might be a limbal vascular engorgement, but possibly not more than that. I mean, I've scoured the literature and I just can't find any papers on overt vascularization due to contact lenses ever since in this century, since silicon hydrogel lenses have been available. But you're right, Jason, you can get vascular engorgement in certain circumstances. It could possibly be solution related, but more likely, if it's a -6 diopter lens, for example, it's more physically proud, if you like, or more physically stiff towards the periphery and a bit thicker. So although the oxygen performance is still good, it's less than it would be on a -1 diopter lens, say. So yes, you can still get vascular engorgement, but not to the point where it would be clinically troubling, where you might need to do much about it.
Right. Now, when silicone hydrogels first came out, everybody thought, well, this is a breakthrough, and it was, but there were other issues that popped up with them that we didn't see as much with hydrogels, and a lot of that revolved around, I think, reusing them, wasn't it? I mean, a lot of the issues we saw with corneal reaction to silicone hydrogels, I think kind of was more solution interaction and or overwear type of things. And do you feel that now that we've got both daily disposables and silicone hydrogels, that again we've essentially solved those issues that we had with SiHy lenses when they first came out?
Yeah, well, a daily disposable silicon hydrogel lens, to my way of thinking, is just about the ideal lens, because you've solved hypoxia and you've solved deposit problems just in the one hit. I think the problems in the early days of silicon hydrogels partly related to the fact that the early generation lenses did not have a good surface treatment. They'd have a surface treatment or a surface coating that wasn't optimal. The surface coating reputedly wore off within a week or so, and that then the lens became a little bit more hydrophobic, a little less comfortable, maybe more deposits might form, which became less of a problem as we started replacing lenses more frequently. Correct. But the early days, I think we probably went through about 2 or 3 generations of silicon hydrogels before we got to the point now where there's internal wetting agents, so they don't need any surface coating or treatment. They're, if you like, intrinsically wettable and hydrophilic, and therefore naturally comfortable. And you replace them every day a lot of the time. Well, 60% of the time.
Right. That's the idea, at least.
50% of soft lenses now are daily disposable worldwide, 50 to 60%. So it's becoming the norm, really.
Yep. So next question. If you can look back at, go back maybe 30 years. So go back into the 1990s. You've been in contact lenses at this point for 10 or 15 years or more. And you've started to see things like the advent of daily disposables. At that point, were you thinking, in 20 years, 30 years, we're going to have the ability to make a lens that you could put in your eye and just leave in for long periods of time, and it was going to be healthy to wear? Or did you imagine that we were going to be using soft lenses for things like drug delivery or any other unique applications, or more effective aberration control? We've talked about that, touched on a little. Are there any things that you expected to see that haven't come to fruition, and maybe why?
Well, most things, I guess, eventually have come to fruition. The thing that people have been thinking about lately, if you want to look even further into the future, is augmented reality contact lenses, lenses with some sort of smart electronics. I mean, we do have, of course, the triggerfish lens for measuring glaucoma, but they're talking about lenses now that can assess the level of glucose in the tears for, say, diabetic patients, maybe assess the levels of other metabolites in the tears, which reflect the systemic level of those metabolites as well. And working out those correlations, of course, is important. But on top of that, apart from, if you like, the biosensing role of contact lenses, there's the augmented reality. Maybe they can be fitted with some sort of camera type system, or a system that can project an image onto the retina, and you can have just like the Google Glass that came out. It was a bit of a failure,
right?
But that sort of thing. And there are some groups that are actively working on that. So it would not surprise me in the next 10 years if we get that sort of lens, and that will then change actually how we practice. As optometrists, we have to be aware of electronics and augmented reality principles and those sort of things. The way we prescribe and the things we deal with will be quite different.
And we may have to start dealing with deposits again, because you probably aren't throwing those lenses away every day.
Eventually you probably will. But
Right, eventually.
I think initially they're going to be very expensive, and
Right.
you're going to want to use the same lens for a long period of time. So maybe history will repeat itself in that regard.
That's right. Well, that was a good wrap back around to reminding everybody that in the next month and the month after, we're going to talk more and more about the future of contact lenses as well. So stay tuned for those episodes as well. As we wrap up this episode, it's been a pleasure to get to chat with you. Can you, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but can you share any story about someone or some people? You mentioned a few people who influenced you early on, but obviously you've got to work with some great people in this industry over the last 40 or 50 years, some pioneers and people who just revolutionized this whole industry, whether it came from the research they did, the ideas they had. Can you share a story about someone that just had a big impact on you, or your relationship with someone that's meaningful over the years?
Yeah, well, there have been a lot of people I've sort of come across over the years that have had an influence. Certainly early on, Leo Carney was a big influence. Back at the University of Melbourne, he quite inspired me. He ushered me through my PhD, and that was a very important learning. And I went to UC Berkeley and spent a year with Ken Pulse, and that was an interesting year as well, learning the way things happen in America and the way things occur there. I guess for most of my career, I was more, if you like, motivated by my more immediate peers, people I was working with closely, like in particular Professor Philip Morgan at the University of Manchester, who we've done all our survey work with, and much of my important work in contact lenses really was emerged when I was in Manchester. Well, originally with Noel Brennan at the University of Melbourne. Noel Brennan and I did a lot of our original work on hypoxia and with contact lenses and lens movement and deposits and so. Noel Brennan was a very important, if you like, contemporary influence, as was Philip Morgan up until now. Right up until now, I do a lot of work with Phil.
Yeah. Well, obviously I love a few things in life. One is contact lenses, and I love history. So throwing names around to me, this is fun stuff. So I just keep thinking maybe you need to write a book for us about the history of contact lenses and just share some of these stories and some of the people along the way. I think that would be a fascinating read, but maybe that's just me. I don't know. So. Well, again, I want to thank you so much again, Professor Efron, for being here today. It's been a great pleasure to meet you. I don't know that I've ever actually met you before, but it's been an honor and a great program today. So truly humbling experience for me. So thank you for getting up early with us and joining us for this episode. As a reminder to everybody who's enjoys these programs, you can look for prior episodes of CLS Live on the Contact Lens Spectrum page on Facebook, as well as on clspectrum.com, the website for Contact Lens Spectrum. And again, you can join me next month for our next episode. We will talk the present of contact lenses with Dr. Lyndon Jones on Tuesday, June 14th. So hope to see you all then. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.